One of my favorite books of all time is Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. I read it about 5 times, and I think that each experience reading it is better than the last. But there's one part in particular that stands out to me. It was the moment when Noah realized that he was getting certain privileges just because he was a half-white biracial boy in an all-black household. And he said, I had a choice. I could champion racial justice in my home, or I could enjoy Granny's cookies. And as most of us would at his age, he went with the cookies. But this is a problem reflected across our education system. We know inequality exists, but for most of us, we're still choosing the cookies. Or in other words, we're sitting idly by and enjoying our privilege. And this is a trap of complacency. We are happy and complacent enough with the system that while benefiting some, disadvantages others. And it's this complacency that prevents us from pursuing a fair system. But I believe that this is mostly due to the fault of disconnects. We don't know what education is like for those at the disadvantage. We don't get to hear what it's like for them. And even when we do hear, sometimes we don't listen, and instead, we talk over them. The only way for us to break free from this trap is to be willing to learn about the different perspectives in our education system. We need to know exactly how a system, while benefiting some, marginalizes others. And it's because so many of us have been benefiting from the system for such a long time that we now have to put the cookies aside and find out what it's like to be without. To put things into perspective with you all, let me share a story. To give you some context, I'm a debater, and I'm very lucky to be blessed with a group of kind and like-minded debater friends. This story is about one of them, and unlike most of the stories you're likely to hear on here, this one does not have a happy ending. My friend is so talented, hardworking, and passionate about debate. Being American born and raised, he has perfect mastery over standard English. But one day, at a round, or a debate tournament, he came out of the round confused, hurt, and angry. He was told by one judge that he sounded uneducated, and that took away from the persuasiveness of his argument. And among all the other students in the round, he was the only person to have received that comment. Now, I've heard him speak, and every time I've witnessed him debate, I was astounded by his sharp intellect, logical argumentation, and precise articulation. So why, you may ask, why did such a bright and aspiring debater receive such an insensitive and discouraging comment? Well, what I didn't tell you until now is that my friend is African American. Being African American, his dialect is marked by certain linguistic markers of African American Vernacular English, or AAVE. For example, at the end of the word TH, he often pronounces it with an F instead. But more importantly, my friend was not uneducated. He was perceived as such due to the slight variations in his speaking patterns. He was discriminated against because of his race, and he was a victim of injustice just because he was different. And as you all can expect, he left the activity altogether soon after. Witnessing my friend's experience opened my eyes to the biases and the prejudices of our high school debating society, and by extension, our education system. But as I reflected on this, I realized that these types of prejudices aren't likely to be isolated experiences. They're probably prevalent across America. But on top of that, these type of injustices are amplified when racist perceptions are enforced in our schools and in our teaching curriculums. These types of injustices aren't isolated experiences. Movements have been in place for equality in education since the early stages of the civil rights movement. And we've been fighting for equality in education ever since. And luckily, along the way, there are some kind of successes that we can draw inspiration from. For example, in 1996, there was a resolution passed that aimed to introduce different dialects of English with a focus on AVE through culture and programs. The purpose of the resolution wasn't to teach the different dialects of English, but rather teach both educators and students that different dialects were different, not deficient. It also aimed to introduce pedagogical approaches to bridge the gap between AVE and the standard acquisition of standard English in schools. If implemented, it would have been a policy that paved the way for a more inclusive environment for AVE-speaking students, an environment where they were respected and heard, not told that their language was deficient or uneducated. But it was rejected. Not only was it rejected, but the Clinton administration at that time withdrew all federal funding for programs that promoted this line of thinking. And their justification for this was that AVE was a slang that should be kept out of the classroom. And this slang label legitimized the marginalization of our fellow students and our fellow Americans. But I wonder if any of those in the Clinton administration truly listened to the experiences of students or even tried to put themselves in their shoes. But these type of policies that limit opportunities for certain groups of students are just a small piece of a larger puzzle. Inequality manifests itself in a variety of forms, even in the community we know so well and love. So more closer to home, let's take a look at our very own county of Montgomery, Maryland. When my friends and I go to school, especially as students who attend a magnet program, we go to school knowing that we have access to the best education that Maryland has to offer. Maybe it's a testimony to Poolesville's success as an academic institution that we rarely have to worry about the lack of educational opportunities. We know that there's an abundance of resources at our disposal and that our teachers are well equipped to teach us. Being enclosed in this little bubble of educational privilege, I was under the impression that all schools were like mine. So I was surprised to realize the widespread inequality that affected our neighboring schools. As you all know, the way school boundaries are drawn divides our district in half demographically. And while most people would assume that these divisions are dividing us racially equally, that's not the case. In fact, half of our county has over 3/4 of minority students, and the other half remains predominantly white. And that's all due to the way school boundaries are drawn. It's hard to realize that the way these school boundaries are drawn aren't for the purpose of making education more equal for all. Rather, they're influenced by a variety of things, including property values, school funding, and the political voices of residents living within those boundaries. Property taxes often compose of a large part of a school's funding, so the higher the property value, the more funding is available for the quality of education. And as a result, low-income minority students are forcibly clustered in one part of the community, while the other part remains predominantly high-income and white. And these minority schools become overcrowded and underfunded, and as a natural consequence, their educational outcomes get worse. We've seen this from county to county to state. And that's also why, as of 2021, there are continuous patterns across the board of our schools being resegregated. People like to say that education is the ultimate equalizer. When you have education, you have opportunities. But when this same system is throwing so many boundaries in your way and preventing you from achieving your academic goals, you're forced to confront the hard truth that education, from its association, quality, and environment, is far from being equal. Now let's go to the part where I talk about disconnects. The people in power, the power to make necessary changes, have experiences far different from those who need the system changed. And this actively prevents us from achieving any type of progress. But luckily, as Americans, we're protected by the First Amendment, which gives us the power to voice change. This means that this gap can be eliminated through the power of our voices and through successive change. In my own efforts to raise awareness about the different struggles faced by minority groups, I created a little newspaper. I wanted to give students an opportunity for their voices to be heard, for their voices to inspire, and for their voices to change. And that's exactly what it did. Their stories inspired me to spur on change. Their stories inspired me to advocate for educational equality. And their stories gave me courage to speak here today. Only by listening to these voices can we achieve genuine and effective advocacy. As Michelle Obama once said, there's a power in allowing yourself to be known and heard, in owning your unique story, in using your authentic voice. And there's a grace in being willing to know and hear others. We all know someone who might be getting marginalized by this system, and chances are they're your friend, neighbor, or classmate. Imagine how much change we can inspire once we begin listening to their stories, because that's the only way we can truly understand their experiences. But we also need to do more than listen. We need to uplift and amplify, inviting all to hear their experiences and invite others into conversations about racial and societal issues. We need to fight for others, to speak up, and create change. It's only through this exchange of ideas and experiences that we can create enough discourse, a discourse loud enough to grab the attention of those who can implement the policies that create change. And that's how we, as a community, give power to the voices and make things better for not only us, but for future generations. So whether it be today or tomorrow, let's take some time to put our cookies aside and give power to the voice instead. Thank you.